Okay, so today Extinction Rebellion launched an International Day of Action, and I didn't watch the headlines, but from what I gathered, they made a noisy protest in Trafalgar Square with drums and other instruments. And one of the stunts that they have engaged in, they glued themselves to a public building. I believe it was a bank of some sort, and that's pretty much in keeping with their sort of tactics. Now, I'm not going to lie, I have very, very little respect for this group and their agenda. And I know I rattled a few people the other day with my video, because you can always tell when there's thumbs down. So clearly I triggered a few Extinction Rebellion activists because they don't like anyone challenging them. This is the thing. If you do challenge them, then you're a climate denier. What I actually want to talk about is the authoritarianism of Extinction Rebellion, because this is a movement that bases their argument on being courageous outsiders who know the truth about climate change, and it's their job to educate the rest of us ignorant peasants. And it's their job to pressure the government to make the policies exactly as they see fit. Even though there's no consensus from climate scientists on exactly the right approaches that need to be taken. There's consensus that something needs to be done. There's consensus that there is a real problem here, and that some of the world's most vulnerable people are being impacted by it. But this is something that Extinction Rebellion don't seem to grasp. They have the self-righteous idea that they see the light and no one else does. So anyone that challenges them, they must be a climate change critic. They cannot rationalise, they cannot fathom that actually maybe people aren't questioning the science. They're not questioning the threat, they're questioning the tactics. But the authoritarianism comes from this black and white mentality that they have. We can do whatever we want, and that's it. Our way is the only way. That is what they believe. And I do sincerely wonder at what point they will go from disruptive tactics of vandalism and blocking roads and gluing themselves to buildings to actually elevating to something more serious, sabotage, maybe even material bomb attacks. And if you think that's an exaggeration, it's happened in the past. In the 1970s, the Angry Brigade, there were low-level terrorist movements, not big terrorist groups that killed lots of people, but low-level terrorist movements that did engage in criminal damage and sabotage. After all, Roger Hallam, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, is on record. I watched his video saying that previous tactics of talking to the government hasn't worked, so anything's legitimate now. That's essentially what they argue. Anything's legitimate. And when I've put this to them that they don't have wider public support, they say things like, talking doesn't work, so we have no choice but to do this. Really? No choice but to glue yourselves to buildings? I want to pick up though on this idea of direct action protests as a means, because they'll often say, the civil rights movement done that, the suffragettes done that. There is a strong caveat with that. It's true that there were suffragettes who took direct action, like Emily Davidson jumping in front of the King's horse, and in the more extreme cases, although that did put real risk to the jockey, I might add, who apparently was haunted for the rest of his life by what he saw. There's still debate over whether she intended to kill herself or not. But, the more extreme suffragettes did basically resort to terrorism, planting bombs in the homes of MPs they suspected of not being on their side. Even the Prime Minister's house, even though Lloyd George was broadly sympathetic to them. Later on with the civil rights movement, what was a direct action? Well, they staged sit-ins to segregated diners, which no doubt infuriated the segregationists. And they got a lot of abuse for that, but they didn't vandalise buildings. They didn't vandalise courthouses or anything like that to try and get their point across. In 1931, Gandhi's Salt March Gandhi visited the mill towns of northwest England like Blackburn to actually see for himself the sort of economic impact that was having. With Extinction Rebellion, they don't believe in responsibility. That's the fundamental difference. Now, with the suffragettes, there was actually a gulf within the movement. Though not every suffragette believed in those direct action tactics. In fact, the Pankhursts as a family were divided between mother and daughter. I believe Emmeline and her older daughter, for example, supported the war effort. Her youngest daughter was a pacifist and a socialist, so they took a radically different approach. So it's false to say, oh well, the suffragettes done it, therefore it's legitimate. Actually, there's no evidence that the more extreme action the suffragettes took is what eventually paved way for the Women's Suffrage Act of 1928. One could argue it was the assertive, persistent dedication of other activists who kept lobbying Parliament for change, and it was a long, hard process, but that could easily be considered to be effective as well. Because the wider public, there's no evidence that they support, for example, suffragettes planting bombs. The vast majority of women didn't support those tactics. So it's a false analogy to say, oh, look at what these movements done in the past. Any movement that polarizes the wider public is not going to get success. Now, when Extinction Rebellion say, oh, well, councils have made these changes and the government is doing these things, that's far more likely because climate change is a real problem and they would have been doing them anyway. This grandiose sense of self-importance that Extinction Rebellion has, this idea that they alone, see the light. Oh, well, the government must be doing this because we made fools of ourselves by, spraying water, wasting water, trying to vandalise a historic building. It's just a nonsense way of thinking. And I think the main criticism actually has been that the police have been too hands-off. These people believe they can do whatever they want. And at some points, they need to understand they can't. Societies have rules. I can't take all my clothes off and just go into a shopping centre. I'd be arrested for public indecency. Societies have rules. And if they don't have rules, then we have collapse. And whenever they're challenged, Extinction Rebellion people say, oh, that's authoritarianism. I can do whatever I want. I'm not bound by rules. So there's a fundamental anarchist attitude to them. But I say it's authoritarianism as well because it's a authoritarian arrogance that they can impose on other people's lives. And people shouldn't be able to question that because if they are, hey, they're a climate denier. But let's put this in context. If you look at Extinction Rebellion's Facebook page, they've got somewhere in the region of 300,000 likes, give or take. This is a country of 66 million. So there isn't any evidence of widespread public support for their movement. I think most of the people who support them are kind of either activists or people who are kind of broadly sympathetic because they think that they alone are the messengers bringing about the truth around climate change. But I think the vast majority of the public don't support them. And I think, if you say to someone, are you okay with someone disrupting you visiting a sick relative in hospital because they believe about, the environment needs to be tackled, or do you believe in, sponsoring or supporting methods that don't involve disrupting the public? They're far more likely to go for the latter. This idea, this sheer arrogance Extinction Rebellion has, that's the problem I have with them. They never introspect, they never question themselves. Not to mention their hypocrisy, the waste of water. I find it's a waste of time even trying to debate with them because they've already convinced themselves they are 100% correct. They're very arrogant people. They're incapable of self-introspection, which is something every reasonable, mature adult should do. I do it. I question, is there more I can do in terms of recycling, in terms of saving energy? And I'm sure there is. But Extinction Rebellion believe they've got it all worked out, they're correct, everyone else is wrong, or we're idiots. And they can do what they like. That's honestly what they believe. So I do think the police need to start to crack down on them, proportionately speaking. So if they, put tents outside a public building where people are going to work, they should be forcibly removed. Not violence, not brutality, just, dismantle their tents. And I think the public should have a right to do what they see fit. If they're blocking someone going to work, say for example, or let's say someone's visiting a relative in hospital, I think they would have every right to get out of their vehicle and use water in a bottle, throw it over them to try and get them to move. Not violence. I'm not calling for vigilantism, but these people need to understand that they can't do whatever they want. This is not legitimate protest. This is anarchy. And I, for one, am sick of them.